Ladies and gentlemen, some of you may recall from your grandparents what an outhouse is. And I'm Scott.
I don't like
Bill
where this
Whittle.
is going.
And this is your Backstage episode of Right Angle. I forgot Stephen Green, but then again, Stephen Green's not the one who was indisposed. Bill, I posted an alarming note on your Facebook page, and I identified myself, said this is Scott Ott, and apparently I gave the impression by the phrase "fell ill" that this was the family should be called and gathered around.
Well, it wasn't too far from the case. I had breakfast, and then an hour later, I felt like I ate Michael Moore, and I just
in one sitting,
in one sitting with no mayonnaise.
He's wafer thin,
and I just suddenly could not move. But I was much better after a day of rest, so I'm much better now. We're here very, very, very early the next day, trying to figure out what month it is at this point. So
That's right.
This will be your insightful vision into the world of American politics.
Well, and I'm sorry, I just shattered the third wall, or whatever they call that, by allowing people to fourth wall. Thank you, the fourth estate, the third wall, whatever it is. But I now have allowed people to know that when this show is happening, you're not watching it in real time. Like, I think people think they're in a Google Hangouts call or a FaceTime call or something.
Well, that's why we have to script everything so carefully. We have an entire staff of producers on all three ends, probably 35, 40 people at all times, trying to make sure that we maintain the illusion of spontaneity here.
The polish really shows.
The illusion of
spontaneity.
There should be a period after spontaneity.
We'll take that out in post.
Is it the illusion of spontaneity here, or the illusion of spontaneity? Here is our topics.
Yeah, no, you got it right the first time.
It's genuine imitation spontaneity.
That's what you get when you hire basement level.
So because last week Steve was nice enough to switch places with me and take my members only episode, that means that what goes around comes around, and it has come back around to me.
As it does.
And so it is down to me, and it is down to you. And I have a couple of topics for this week. I think I know which one should be members only, but I'll withhold that until you guys get a chance to hear it. The first one was Netherlands, a Netherlandish man. Nether region, what do you call that? I don't know. Anyways, somebody...
The
Dutchman.
Low Countries.
The Dutchman. There's a Dutchman who has actually sued to be allowed to identify as a 49-year-old man despite the fact that he's 69 years old. And so he actually filed with the state courts to change his birth date. And his reasoning for this was that he feels 49, and that time is just it's a man-made concept. It's something that we have designed in order to make things convenient for us, but that it has no reality. It's fluid like gender, he said. And so he feels that he is being discriminated against because of age. It's more difficult to get a job when you're 69 than when you're 49. It's more difficult to get a date on Tinder when you're 69.
Yes, that's what it was all about. It was about getting Tinder dates.
That's right. You swiped my line. Anyway,
sorry.
So that's okay. For those of you who have ever heard of Tinder, the only thing I know about Tinder is that you have to swipe something. Other than that, I've never seen the app.
Swipe left.
And swipe. Is that it? Swipe left.
Swipe
Thank
left
you.
as a general
That was a little
rule.
too ready.
Don't swipe right unless it knocks you right off your chair.
That was a little too ready. Your explanation of that, I think, Bill.
Well, I've just done research on everything, as I always do before we do a right angle show.
That's
tightly scripted.
So anyway, I thought it was an interesting concept, and of course there are some transgender people who are rather upset with this gentleman for.
Are they now?
Yes, for implying
redefining reality.
He is losing sleep over that.
For implying that time is fluid like gender. So anyway, so that's one of my topics.
I think he should spend 3 artificially constructed periods of man-made time in the county clink for wasting our time. Nothing too severe, just enough to drill the reality of it into him, just a little bit.
You know, I blew my 12-year-old son's mind a couple of weeks ago when I told him the old Groucho Marx line that time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana.
And Isn't that awesome? Like a 78-year-old joke that can still bring a laugh.
I love it. Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted. My bad.
That's okay. So apparently when he started speaking in court, the judges, in his terms, giggled like little girls. But after he made
Seriously? Come on
yes,
now.
that's what he said. But after he made his impassioned defense of freedom and how a man should be able to choose what a man should be able to choose, they took it more seriously. However, they still did not grant his petition, and saying that that 20 years of legal records would be eradicated by such a move, by changing his birthday by 20 years. In any case, I thought it had interesting implications. So that's the one.
Absolutely, it's great. I love it.
Yeah.
That's the one show. And then the other one is a rather compelling column written by former Congressman John Dingell. That's got to be, that's the kind of name that makes me feel good. I was only named Scott Ott. So anyway, John Dingell wrote a column about how broken Congress is, and he ought to know. He was there for 59 years. And so he is not there anymore.
I've been here for 59 years. That's too long.
He had the humility to step aside so that his wife could take his place.
Oh, well, the Republic weeps in gratitude.
Yes. So anyway, he has a recipe for fixing the federal government. He said in 1958, a couple of years after he assumed his congressional seat, 73% of the American public trusted the federal government, but as of 2017, only 18% trusted the federal government.
And you know why that is? Because many people hold office for 59 years. That's why.
Yeah. So I don't want to tell you here backstage what his recipe is, but he has got at least a 4-ingredient recipe for how we can fix the distrust that the American people hold for their elected officials and their important institutions. Why are you laughing with your finger in between your tooth cap?
It also works against rickets and whooping coughs.
Now he's only 89 years old now, and I will tell you, here's just one quote from him.
He's got a few years of service left in him. We're screwed.
He's got. It just makes me want to invent 10,000 old diseases you never heard of before. Like, well, I was suffering from yellow jaw. It's like,
back in the days when I used to have to wear a bell around my neck and cry out, unclean, unclean.
That's right.
Because I was a leper.
I had the yellow jaw.
So anyway, right after a bout with scurvy, he said this. My advice, John Dingell said, former Congressman John Dingell, my advice always begins with truth. Would-be despots and demagogues try to discredit it. He said, his advice always begins with truth, and that's why would-be despots and demagogues try to discredit it. So because both of you happen to be either would-be despots or demagogues, I'd like to bounce these off of you in an episode. So my theory was that should be the members episode, and the one about the guy who wants to be legally 49. All righty.
We may have to go public with this members one, though, because this sounds deliciously ironic.
Stuff happens. Indeed. All right. Stephen Green, just having just quenched his thirst from the Starship Enterprise, what are you planning to discuss this week?
Yeah, I wrote a column about this yesterday morning, and it's a fascinating issue, I think. Defense Secretary John Mattis said at a meeting, or right before a meeting with his counterpart from India on Monday, that 40 years is enough war in Afghanistan. And, 17 of those are ours. 17 of
Did you
those
say 400 years or 40 years?
40.
Okay.
Because that's the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which I believe was Christmas Day, 1978. Or was it Christmas Day, 1979? Anyway, it's 39 or 40 years on this Christmas. That's a long time for a country to be at war. It's a long time for us to have been at war, and I think Mattis
and it's the shortest war in Afghanistan's history.
Right.
That's right. Now, I think Mattis, because I think he's a strategy guy, and he understands the reason why the war can drag on so long is that because the Muslim rebels, so to speak, are able to hide out in the mountains. So I expect that Mattis will be coming up with a plan to get rid of that defensive bulwark.
Well, you know what? There are no mountains in Iraq to speak of, except in the north where the Kurds mostly run the show already and, have for probably 20 years now. But the war is ongoing in Iraq. There are no mountains in Syria to speak of. War is ongoing there. And it comes down... I'm going to save this point for the segment, I think, for the actual segment. But I think Mattis is only half right, because when he says we have to get out, he couches this in language. We have to work with the UN. We have to work with the government in the capital, and all of these things that are just not going to end the war in Afghanistan. I think it's time to just pack our things and go.
What do you expect from a liberal pansy like John Mattis?
That's right. I think because
lotus-eating, pot-smoking, frickin' hippie.
Well, because we are starting to become more accepting of the use of what used to be called illicit drugs in this country, I think we should just kind of go with the flow and just go to the government of Afghanistan and say, look, we would just like to buy your entire country and use it as a poppy farm. That's all
I think we did. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what we did.
Mattis is going to be dropping enormous lead weights out of C-17s, and Operation Kansas will begin on December 12th.
We're literally going to flatten the country.
Pound it into the ground.
Every mountain will be laid low. Okay, so Bill Whittle, I can't imagine that you were just languishing in agony yesterday. I'm sure you were steeling yourself for this
languishing.
Just no agony, just languishing.
No, just languishing. Yeah, I know it's a little bit behind the curve, but I think it's important. I want to
This Walter Mondale guy, what do you think? Oh, no, not that far.
He's going to raise our taxes. He said so.
Dukakis is the man. I can feel the
the big
what was it? The Mike Mentum.
The Mike.
Yeah, competence, not ideology.
I want to do a segment on the side of George Bush that most people don't know. George Bush,
HW.
Yeah, most people don't know. There's a book called Flyboys, written by the guy who wrote Flags of Our Fathers, and it never got the traction Flags of Our Fathers did. But just up the road from Iwo Jima is an island called Chichijima. It's about halfway between Iwo and Japan. Chichijima had a little more development on it than Iwo, and they had a gigantic mountain there too. It's a volcanic island, and on top of this mountain, the Imperial Japanese Navy had their transmitters that allowed them to communicate with their entire fleet. So U.S. was launching airstrikes against this mountaintop transmitter, which is a devilish thing to hit, continuously. And George Bush, youngest aviator in the Navy, got shot down over Chichijima, but what most people don't know was that a number of other flyers had been captured over Chichijima, and the Japanese ate them.
Damn.
They ate them. And one or two of them were turned into bayonet practice. The Japanese procedure for bayonet practice was to put somebody in a white shirt and paint a circle around the guy's heart, and you were not allowed to strike within that area.
Yeah, to prolong.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is how they toughened up their troops, was they gave them a bayonet, and the ones that were considered to be the weakest ones, in other words, the ones that had some shred of humanity, were told just to go out and stick these American airmen until they died. And they were executed with samurai swords, and a number of them had their livers eaten by the high command on the island. So when George Bush gets shots down off of Chichijima and paddles out to sea, he didn't know that. But he did know what it's like to be captured by the Japanese. He'd heard enough about that. And the one thing I really do want to talk about is I remember when Bush was president, and somebody asked him about that. And they said, "What were you thinking about when you were paddling out to sea?" And he said, "I was thinking about the Bible and the Constitution." And the reporters laughed out loud. Laughed out loud, like, sure you were, Mr. Candidate. Sure you were. You were thinking about the Constitution when you were paddling away from that island. But I'm 100% sure that's exactly what George Bush was thinking about. It's exactly what he was thinking about, because his 17 or 18-year-old life was in, this much rubber. There's an island with solid ground, and I'm going to paddle out into the middle of the Pacific freaking Ocean and hope that I get picked up. And he did.
By a submarine, if I remember correctly.
By a submarine, that's exactly right. In fact, there's actual footage of George Bush himself being rescued at sea. And I just want people, first of all, I want them to know that about Bush. And secondly, I want them to know that about that age group. And I'm going to find out how old Bush was when he entered the Navy.
He signed up on his 18th birthday.
On his birthday.
1944, yeah.
So I want to find a couple of modern 18-year-old celebrities and just compare their lives.
I have two questions, though, Bill. What color were his pajamas, and what kind of latte did he drink?
That's right. Yeah. He didn't drink latte. He drank a cup of Joe in the morning because he's going to go fly 4 strike missions that day in his Avenger.
Hell of a thing.
And that's and that name's a little triggering, by the way, Avenger. I mean,
sorry about that. Yeah.
The whole idea of war is just so stupid and ridiculous. We should have just simply let them do whatever they wanted to.
I'll be honest with you. When I saw George H.W. Bush speak at Penn State in what we called the Hub, it was the Hetzel Union building there, in kind of a fishbowl-like room with several hundred people packed into it when I was a student. And I remember thinking, this is when he was running for president. Okay, so at this point he's a presidential candidate running against Ronald Reagan and others.
Oh, so this is 80.
80. What's that? So yeah, so it would be 80 because I started school in '79. That would make sense.
So did I.
Yeah. Anyway, he was ridiculing Ronald Reagan for his so-called voodoo economics and basically just lambasting him. And I thought it was a pretty good speech. Of course, I was a liberal at the time, and so, it sounded good to me. And then when he accepted the nomination to be Ronald Reagan's vice president, I wrote him off. At that point, I just said,
he went to work for the devil.
Yeah, well, and it was not so much that he went to work for Ronald Reagan. It was just that he was so vociferously against him, but as soon as he had an opportunity to grab the brass ring, he took it, in my view. And I remember the quote from, I believe it was John Kennedy, when they asked him that if he didn't win his party's nomination, would he be willing to accept the vice presidential nomination? At which point he said something on the order of no, because any man who is willing to accept second place one time will be willing to accept second place for the rest of his life, or some words to that effect. And so, but I'll admit, in hindsight, you look back at him and you go, he's a different kind of man. George H.W. Bush is a character like we have not seen in a long time, and we're unlikely to see again. I
don't think we will.
A couple of things I'll share during the episode about him that I've read recently that really impacted me the most. But I'm not saying that that I'm putting the stamp of approval on his entire 4 years of presidency. Because of that, I thought he made a mistake with the read my lips statement. You just shouldn't say things like that because there's so many uncontrollable factors later. But in any case, I think that there ought to be more men like this in office. We'd be a better place if there were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great.
I've got quite a lot to say about Bush, and one story is very personal, and I'll save that for the segment.
Fantastic. All right, let's get on with this horror.
Oh, yes. Guess we have to start recording these shows. Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful for your patience with us. We've had a couple of rough situations in our lives in the last week or so that have caused us some delays. And all we get from the members at BillWhittle.com is empathy and sympathy and condolences and well wishes and prayers. And that means...
And checks. Don't forget the checks.
A lot to us. The checks as well, yes. And the
occasional Lithuanian.
That's right. Flowers may be sent in the form of checks to Bill Whittle. Anyway, we appreciate that kind of encouragement.
Started 30 years in advance. Get a nice big number up.
It was the phrase "fallen ill." I think that's the fell ill, and maybe it's because of the dual meaning of the word "fell," which can also mean evil. that could have been troubling to some people. In any case,
secret's out.
We thank the members at BillWhittle.com for letting us pursue this thing that we love so dearly and for becoming part of that enterprise in a way that causes other people to be blessed by it. So for Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.